Yes, they are banning books. This is what you need to know and how you can help. Welcome, everybody, for what I consider maybe one of the most poignant and powerful discussions that the BookFest has undertaken. It's really easy to keep things fun and light and uplifting, and we definitely want to do that. That's what books are about. They inspire us and they take us to different places and they make us feel oh so good. There's nothing more powerful than climbing into somebody else's skin and taking on the point of view of our favorite characters and experiencing the world or even other worlds in new and fantastic, wonderful ways. And I think that's the thing that just gets me right here. When I think of that being taken away from people in our country, it's something that really spurred and incited the desire to have this panel. And I'm so honored to present it to you because there's so much going on. And it seems to, like, sometimes with everything going on in the world, so many things in the news cycle sometimes, right? So many different topics and causes that we can get behind, that something like this may sometimes feel like it's a little bit, lost in the shuffle in terms of what the average person or average reader might know about. So without further ado, let me go around. I'm going to quickly introduce each of our wonderful panelists and also give them a moment to introduce themselves in a little bit more depth. First of all, Peter Bromberg. Hello. He is from the organization EveryLibrary. Peter, do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm the associate director at EveryLibrary. I have been a librarian for 30 years, most recently the director of the Salt Lake City Public Library in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I've been on the board of EveryLibrary for about 10 years, and I made a decision to join full-time about a year and a half ago, really to work on these anti-access legislation and censorship issues, which were already starting to heat up. And additionally, I co-lead the advocacy efforts for the Utah Library Association. Thanks for inviting me to be here with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. Rich Davis, he's a writer, he's a creator, the underground horror sensation Cult of Dracula. I want to hear more about that. Rich, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hi. Rich Davis, as you said, writer, creator of Cult of Dracula and the sequel Rise of Dracula from SourcePoint Press. And I have several other comics coming out not in the Dracula universe in 2023. So if you don't like Dracula, just wait. I got something else for you. I'm also the owner of Nirvana Comics in Knoxville, Tennessee, which I'm very happy that you invited me on to participate in this panel. Because we took a direct action when Tennessee banned Mouse, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, from school curriculums. So we raised well over $100,000 to give away free copies of Mouse to any student who requested them. So, we in this topic, there are ways to take direct action against it.
Absolutely. And I love that because in addition to raising awareness, this is about what we can do because sometimes we feel so helpless, and you are definitely not helpless there with what you're doing. And I think too, it's worth pointing out that the panel here comes from this issue from many different perspectives as well. We are authors, we are from organizations, we are from different communities where this is being impacted. And I think that's something to note. Angela, I'll come over to you next because you're one of those people. You're an author and you're a publisher. You're oh so many things. Can you tell us about yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Angela Shante. That's my pen name. My full name is Angela Shante Johnson. I am an author, publisher, and at the heart of everything that I do, I'm an educator. So banning of books is something that's definitely close to my heart as a teacher, as an educator, and as an author. A lot of what I do in publishing is talk about diversity in publishing, making sure to beat the horns and drum the beats for these types of authors whose books are typically marginalized already and now being banned on top of everything else. So that's me.
Thank you so much. And Lee, likewise, an author, and you're with IBPA. Can you tell us more about yourself?
Absolutely. Hi. Yeah, I wear a bunch of hats. So I am the director of education and programs, and that's usually book marketing programs at the Independent Book Publishers Association. We're the largest trade association of publishers in the US. We have over 4,000 members. And then I also am an author. So before my day job, I write a few hours every day. And I have 3 books published. 1 I crowdfunded, and 2 were published by indie presses. I'm gay, and a lot of the books I write are about queer history and or otherwise about sort of like communities standing up against discrimination and trying to recognize that the connections between all of us is actually what the differences, our differences sort of make us stronger, not weaker. And if we can sort of stand together in our differences, we can be a more fully realized kind of community. And so book bans are really basically bullying, right? It's picking on one person or one group, and it kind of goes against everything that I feel so strongly about. Having been one of those people that has been picked on, I don't want anybody else picked on.
Right. And your books do a magnificent job of bringing people together in that respect. And we'll get into this in a little bit because it does seem that the LGBTQ plus books tend to dominate a lot of these lists when those themes are prevalent. That I don't know. Is it just a coincidence? I don't think so. So we're going to talk about that. First, my first question I'm going to throw out to the entire panel is, what year is this? And I know, yeah, thank you for laughing. I was hoping you'd laugh, but I think that's what drills down to the core of this is we feel like this is a conversation from the 1950s. And when you realize it's happening today, that's when it really just kind of slaps us in the face. So I'm going to ask a few of you, you can raise your hand or give me a nod. Just, can we set the stage and discuss a little bit of how we got here, especially for people who might not have this happening in their community or know that it's happening in their community. Does anybody want to kind of help us set the stage a little bit on this?
Well, being here in the South, unfortunately, banning books and things like that, they're not all that uncommon. I think they've come to the forefront of media lately, and people are becoming more aware of it. I kind of think social media has been a double-edged sword with this. I think social media has both contributed to this idea of banning books, and it's also helped raise awareness about banning books. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we got here. I think it with our social media landscape the way it is, giving voice to, on a positive side, it gives voice to everyone. On a negative side, it gives a voice to everyone. And there's no need to vet the information that's being put out there. And a little tiny lie or misrepresentation of the truth can very quickly grow into a movement that ultimately leads parents to contact school boards and then leads school boards to panic and ban books.
Yeah. And there's a lot of lists that are floating around right now too. And sometimes you take the list with a grain of salt. There's books that are being challenged. Does anybody else want to add on and help us kind of give a lay of the land? Peter.
Yeah, thanks. I should just mention, Rich had mentioned direct action before. I didn't really say what EveryLibrary is. We're a political action committee for libraries that's 100% donor supported and pro bono. And historically, we've worked with libraries on funding issues and elections. But of course, over the last year or two, we're working really in that censorship space with librarians and parents, boards, associations, pushing back on legislation and pushing back at the school district level, et cetera. But one of the things that we did, I guess, going back a year and a half or more, is actually commission some research to understand where is all this coming from, who's involved, where's the money. And so we had this professionally mapped out, as it were. And, it really started with these groups forming around anti-mask sentiment, right? And then once those networks were in place, the private Facebook groups, et cetera, then that sort of shifted to focusing on the 1619 project and I have to air quote anti-CRT, which shifted into, this parental control was the attack vector that was really intentionally rolled out as a way to win elections and, quite frankly, to appeal to white suburban women, to scare them into thinking about what's happening in their schools. And then that focus shifted over more to anti-LGBTQIA, very much intentional. It was said that it's a more explosive issue than the anti-CRT stuff, right? And ultimately, it's about destabilizing public institutions, particularly public schools, to divert public funding to private parochial schools, which have traditionally been religious schools and traditionally been segregated. So, I mean, that's connected a lot of dots there, but that's what we have, that's what the research uncovered, and that's what we've seen play out.
I appreciate you connecting those dots, because that's the thing. It can feel like a really easy knee-jerk reaction, right? Or for somebody to cherry pick a line or a book title and say, this is what we're talking about. How dare they have a book about this? When really it kind of pulls back to money and people getting, funding for certain things. Just fun fact, really quick, I'm going to give a shout out to Norman, Oklahoma, because that just happens to be where I am right now, in Norman, Oklahoma. Got a place out here when everything, a couple of years ago, when everything kind of switched, because the son-in-law is going to school here. And I know, I can see it. I can see it in, on Twitter, and people talking about they're running for office, they're running for superintendent, and they're spewing things that are just based in fear. So it's easy sometimes, I'm an LA transplant, when you're from a larger metro, to think this couldn't be happening. And then all of a sudden you're here. It's like that frog in boiling water, right? Where it's like, ooh, this is hitting home for me. Lee, I want to go over to, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in that you had said, like, what year is it? And that really resonated, because, I mean, looking at different, IBPA put on like a banned books bingo trivia event. And one of the tidbits was that, like, in 1973, a bookseller in Utah was arrested for selling a copy of The Clockwork Orange. And, they ended up throwing out the case, but this bookseller had to move to a different city to set up shop somewhere else, because they were so unwelcome in that community. And I think that the big thing that's changed between now and then, in addition to what Peter was saying in terms of it being like this really politicized, it's not political, it's been politicized kind of movement, and the organization behind it is also that the barriers to entry for people publishing have never been lower. And so you're getting a lot more voices having an opportunity to either self-publish or to small presses, university presses, association presses. There's this enormous universe that is putting out a lot more content than there ever has been before. Mind you, most of the books that are getting the most attention are the ones from larger presses, but not necessarily. And I feel like that has contributed to this fear of losing control that I think they're playing into, that is being manifested.
Yeah. And when we talk about how, prevalent this is, and, where we're seeing this and hearing of this, Lee, I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that a little bit more as well.
Sure. Yeah, because I mean, being an author of books that are in a category that's being banned, but my books haven't actually been banned, it's very interesting, because it's not, there's so much additional stuff happening beyond the big name titles that are getting the attention and the press and the articles in the New York Times. There's soft censorship, like just the decision by a library or a bookstore just to not carry a book. Like Drama is a great example. This is a really, really sweet, I have some show and tell that I literally just pulled off my bookshelves. It's a really sweet graphic novel, but it for younger kids, so like 4th, 5th grade, but it includes gay characters. And so it's just, they're just deciding, oh, that's going to be too controversial. I mean, every time one of these stories hits, it kind of creates a nervousness among some of these gatekeepers. And I think that that's something that we don't talk a lot about. Another example is that, I believe this is in Texas, that this book, Unspeakable, which actually won, which is about the terrible Tulsa race massacre, it's beautifully done. It's a picture book. It was on a list of winning books for a state award. And in one particular school library, they edited the list and they just didn't include it, because they thought it was going to be, I guess, too controversial. And when it was pointed out to them and they said, hey, we noticed you didn't have Unspeakable on the list, the excuse the library gave was, well, we don't have a copy of it in our library. And then a local bookstore said, we will donate 2 copies for your library. And they're like, no, thank you, we really don't want it. So that kind of stuff is happening too. And then there's, in addition to people being arrested like that in 1973, that bookseller, There are lawsuits. A Virginia politician recently filed obscenity lawsuit against 2 books, A Court of Mist and Fury and Gender Queer, for them being obscene, using a really old law in Virginia that would have made it that you could arrest teachers or librarians or booksellers for allowing younger people to have access to those books. And it was thrown out. But I mean, like, there's so many levels, right? And imagine the fear that puts into teachers in terms of, are they going to have a shelf of books in their classroom for their students? What are they going to put there, right? It creates this environment of fear. And then I also just want to say that books are also canceled. Like, I had a book canceled. I have a book out called No Way They Were Gay, and it's about queer history. And it was purchased by one of the big 5 publishers. And then after our previous president was elected, the publisher canceled it because they freaked out. And they were like, we absolutely can't have a book with, Abraham Lincoln saying that he was gay. And then, it got picked up by Lerner, and it's done really, really well. But that's happening too, that books are just getting canceled before they even have a chance to be published. So I feel like there's lots of different things.
I want to add on to Lee's point about the different levels, and also on the back end, what ends up happening with the creative, because I'm on the creative side of things. And it's like, then what we're telling creatives who write these stories, who are maybe telling their truths or telling historical facts, is that their story isn't welcome, right? That their narrative or their experience isn't welcome, and that in and of itself affects creators' ability to be able to make a profit or sell their books or become to do the thing that they want to do, is just to write stories, right? So also we talk about, yes, how do we get here? But then as a result, kids are losing out on historical stories, right? So as a teacher, that's what I'm thinking. Now, where do we go for these stories? Or do we continue to have the one narrative in history that we've been, so I always want to circle, because it's always like a full circle. We circle back around. It's all about power, yes, all about fear, all about control, and children are being affected. And people who create these stories are also being affected by these bans and what'd you call it? Soft banning?
Soft censorship.
Soft censorship, And so, yes, I have thoughts, a lot of thoughts.
Excellent. I just want to say, No Way They Were Gay. Oh my God, I love your book, Lee. I highly recommend it. And Angela, you need to pick that up, and every educator, every teacher, everyone. It is for everyone to read.
Thanks.
Rich,
can I just chime in on one thing?
Please.
What Angela was saying about so that fear on the part of creators, right? Like when Salman Rushdie, who was just stabbed in New York, when that happens, does it make other authors pause in terms of what they want to write? It's like we have to, like, there's so many levels that you have to find courage in responding to this, because otherwise it could just, I think a lot of it is about controlling that narrative, right? Like controlling the narrative of history. And that's the whole, pushback against teaching people that there was Black people were enslaved in our country, right? Like they call it critical race theory, and they try to make it like it's something, like, oh, don't make my white child feel guilty. But it's like, well, don't you want your child, no matter their background, ethnic background, to know actually what happened in our country, and to be that much more empathetic and wise about how we move forward? Like, it makes me crazy.
Yeah, we talk about things being circular. I mean, that's the circular thing, right? Salman Rushdie, it was 30 years ago Satanic Verses came out, and he was getting death threats. When that happened, by the way, that was powerful. I was like, what year is this that this stuff is happening?
Well, to Lee's point, and to pick up what year is it? I mean, in 1968, I'm a big Charles Schulz Peanuts fan. I kind of grew up with that. And, in 1968, he introduced the character of Franklin, right? As, the first Black character in Peanuts. And literally he's on the beach playing with, Charlie Brown. And then in the next comic, he's sitting at a desk in school next to Linus. And people called up their newspapers and said, we're going to cancel our subscription unless you cancel the Peanuts. And the newspapers then called, Charles Schulz's syndicate and said, if you don't drop this character, we're going to not carry Peanuts anymore. And we can ask why. Like, what was it about showing a black kid playing on the beach with a white kid, or a black kid sitting at a school desk next to a white kid, that led people to say, I'm going to cancel my newspaper subscription, right? Well, and what they were objecting to was the very depiction of the existence of a human being with other human beings, right? And so I think what we're seeing today is fundamentally the same, right? What people are objecting to is they don't want their kids to see that there are gay people. They don't want their kids to see that, that our history has not been as clean as maybe we learned in first grade, right, history class, right? And so they're objecting to the existence of human beings, and they're wanting to erase the voices, erase the experiences, and it's no different than 1968 in many ways. It's rather upsetting. And to the question of how prevalent it all is, Dr. Taslin Magnuson, who I'm sitting in for today, I'm honored to sit in for today. She's maintaining a database that EveryLibrary Institute is hosting on all of the book challenges happening around the country. So we know what the numbers are. There's been over 4,000 challenges last year in bans, 1,500 titles plus, 150 different organized groups who have been behind those challenges. So this is, and it's unprecedented. There's no comparative numbers to this. So we're not making it up, right? This is really happening at unprecedented numbers, and we know the reasons why.
Yeah. And Rich, I didn't know if you wanted to chime in, especially when we're talking about creatives and somebody who is, in one of those communities, if you wanted to hop
Yeah,
in.
it is. It's intimidating, and I'll be honest. There have been times when I'm writing a script that I really take time to parse my words, to make sure that because I don't want to have my books canceled or banned. But then the other part of me says, you know what, screw it, I'm going to do it anyway, because that's just my personality. And you're saying about the challenges, the court cases. Tennessee seems to be just a hotbed for this. They recently passed some legislation here that's making it extremely difficult on teachers to provide classroom books to kids. Because now every teacher in the state of Tennessee has to catalog every book that's in their classroom and submit it to the state for approval. And approval is given on a case-to-case basis. So let's say No Way They Were Gay was approved at one school, even in the same city, like right here in Knoxville. The next school, the state could reject it there, and that's just that's a terrifying thought. And I think it's based in a lot of ignorance, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. I mean it as people who are not informed. They run with these little bitty ideas that they saw on Facebook, and then everything just explodes from there. And we never bother to have conversations with one another and find out, okay, why are you flipping out about this book? Let's talk about that. Let's address it. Today we seem to be so polarized and so tribal in our mindsets. And this is a criticism that can be applied to whether you're on the left or the right. We all dig in on our opinions, and then all we do is shout at each other. We don't ever take the time to talk and address the real issues and try to educate and learn from one another.
Yeah, and you're talking about who's at the forefront of this fight, librarians and educators and parents as well, or you should be. And, there's a situation in Norman, Oklahoma. I'm going to pull it to where I'm at because an English teacher shared a QR code with students for the Brooklyn Library. It was their list of banned books that they put together. This wasn't a list that anybody here put out for schools or librarians. She was sharing somebody else's list, basically encouraging students to read that. She got death threats. She had to move out of her house for a while. I'm not even going to mention her name because I don't want to draw more negative attention. So it might not even be that list that somebody was given or somebody having an inkling. This is something that another library created in Brooklyn, and they're sharing it on the internet. And I think that raises another point too. These books are indeed available a child or somebody who wants to access them can find them. But what does that really say when the school or the library or curriculum isn't providing it, when it's juxtaposed in that way? And I know we've touched on that. Angela, I'll go over to you on that.
I'll tackle that right away. Well, so I'll say, as a person who didn't grow up with a home library, what ends up happening is that the students don't get access to those worlds. Simple, right? You know, we can't assume that every student has the access to go out and purchase books, right? So they do rely a lot on the school library, the local library, to have these books. And if they're not there, that's already one kind of like umbrella that's taken away from this kid. Also, on the teacher side, you know, then that doesn't allow you to fully do your job, right? So if we only have stories that are streaming one narrative, then how can we then educate the next generation and give them a wider span of perspectives, whether historical or lived experiences, because those are definitely important too. And then they don't have that, right? So ultimately, what we're doing is limiting our kids. We're limiting the next generation. We're stopping knowledge from flowing, which it should be doing in our society anyway. It just grinds my gears, and I've been kind of like clenching my pen the whole time, because it's something that I'm always talking about, and it really when I speak to people who are on the other side and parents who are on the other side, and the first question is, well, did you read the book? They haven't. You can't. Yes, it's ignorance, but sometimes you really can't have conversations with people who don't even want to do the work. And so, yeah, again, it grinds my gears.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and when we're kids, we all feel like outsiders, right? There is something we can all go back, excuse me, where we didn't feel like we were part of the norm or the group or what was expected in one way or another. We've all felt that. But I just got to imagine that somebody who might be, thinking about their identity as far as their gender identity or an identity that doesn't necessarily conform, how they might be feeling, just personally, what psychologically might that, put somebody into. And Lee, I'll, kind of
I have to jump in because I have like a perfect segue from that. Okay, so this book was published, and it was called George, and it was published by one of the big fives, written by Alex Gino, and it's about a trans kid in third grade who really wants to play Charlotte in the classroom production of Charlotte's Web, and it was just republished under the title Melissa, because the author felt that was more respectful to the title character, because while their family had named them George, they saw themselves as Melissa. And I thought that the publisher and I think it was the 10th anniversary edition, they republished it under this new name. And this book has been banned under both titles for a couple of reasons, but I wanted to read one in particular because it said, because schools and libraries should not, quote, put books in a child's hand that require discussion. And I thought that was amazing. And it really linked to one of my favorite quotes about book banning, which was from Laurie Halse Anderson, who wrote the brilliant Speak, which is a YA novel. And more recently, the follow-up to that was Shout. And Laurie said, censorship is most often a reflection of the fears of the censors. Their fears that they are not up to the task of having conversations about these hard things. Yep. And I thought that was so accurate, because ultimately, I mean, books should prompt discussion. I think that's, you think a book is successful when people want to discuss the ideas that are brought up in it. And I think it goes back to that, especially for the queer community, it goes back to this idea that, like, parents want to protect their kids from these things by preventing them from knowing they exist. But like, I was raised by straight people and I turned out gay because that's who I am. That's how I was hardwired. So like, it just made me feel like I was alone in the whole universe. Like it didn't make me not gay. It just made me really unhappy and lonely. So I feel like there's this idea that like, if you can keep the information from children, then somehow you make the children safer. But actually, you just put them in more danger, because like, if they don't know how people get pregnant, then they're more likely to get pregnant. But if they know how people get pregnant, they can be alert to that and avoid it. So anyway, I just think that like, it's part of that fear, like not wanting to have these difficult conversations, but that's the job of adults. That's our job as parents, as educators, to have these conversations.
Well, and these groups are also, targeting books that have themes or scenes related to abuse, and that's also, a situation where, I mean, they literally say that's pornographic, as as if pornography appeals to a prurient interest. I mean, pornography objectifies other people, where literature encourages us to reflect on ourselves and other people, and particularly with books that address themes of abuse for kids who may be experiencing that or know people who are experiencing it, and yet they don't have the language to describe it. They don't have the concepts, or they don't have the permission or the understanding that it's okay to speak out or how to speak out about it. That's, it's really dangerous. And those books are lifelines for kids. And the same with kids who are growing up queer and may not understand that that's what that experience is, or they may be in a family or a community where that's not acceptable. That, I know here in Utah that teen suicide, particularly LGBTQ teens, queer teens, suicide rate is through the roof. And this is literally a matter of life or death when we take these books away and just call them porn because there's anything that's sex or sex adjacent in it, even if it's not the main theme, or even, it's clearly not designed to, appeal to a prurient interest the way straight up pornography is. So painting everything that has, the least amount of sexual content in it as porn is just, it's literally a life or death situation for our kids.
And then there are authors like Ellen Hopkins, who writes these books, these beautiful novels in verse that are very difficult and deal with really difficult subjects like addiction to drugs and sex trafficking, a lot of this stuff. And it's fascinating because a lot of her books are banned by people that don't read them, Angela, to your point, that, because they're like, oh, well, we don't want our kids to do drugs, so we want to just ban this book. And it's like, wait a minute, if you actually read the book, no teenager is going to finish reading that book and think, oh, I want to go get hooked on cocaine or whatever the drug was. I don't remember. The monster, she referred to it as. Like, no kid is going to do that. It was like a 300-page PSA about don't do drugs, but just done in such an artful and brilliant way. And yet they're banning it, and it would keep their kids safer.
We ran into that a lot with Project Mouse. We would, because we tried to, when we got a lot of positive feedback from what we were doing by donating those books for free to students, but we also got a lot of negative feedback. And when we met those people coming at us from a negative, one of the very first questions we'd ask is, have you read the book? There you go. Love that book. One of the most profound books in my comic book history growing up. But we'd ask them if they've actually read the book, and by a wide margin, the answer was no. And so we would take the time, we would actually show them the panels that the school boards were objecting to. And it was the biggest problem they had with it, other than using the word damn, was that it showed one of the Holocaust victim mice naked. And, the social media narrative was, oh my God, this is pornographic. They're showing nudity to 10-year-olds. And, but when you put it in context and you confront people with the truth, most of them backed down. They were like, oh, well, that's silly. That happened. We saw Schindler's List. We saw what happened in the Holocaust. We saw that they put them in these concentration camps and starved them to death and dehumanized people. And so again, I really think that the way to address this problem is it's always with knowledge, truth, and conversation. It's the most dangerous thing we can do is hide in our own corners and surround ourselves in an echo chamber.
Yeah. I love Lee. I love your bookshelf, by the way.
It's got everything on there.
Thank you. I'm like, you're talking about Mouse. I'm like, I know I have that in my graphic novel.
He grabs it. Well, and this raises another facet of this conversation too, is it's really easy. And I had this conversation with somebody on Twitter. What books are they're banning? And I was able to spew off some very popular classic titles. And when people were like, how could they ban To Kill a Mockingbird? How could they ban all of this stuff? But then they kind of grow silent on some of the things they may not have heard of, or they don't understand the context of it. So I think it's important to stress that it's not just about books that we might be familiar with or have an immediate knowledge of, and therefore can say, why would anybody ban 1984? That there are books that just because you haven't read them or have no knowledge of them, that should be censored or banned. And I don't know if anybody else wants to expand more on that at this time, or...
Well, it's almost like it's a reading list, right? Like what that teacher in Oklahoma did. It's like, oh, okay, well, all right, now I want to read, Fun Home by Alison Bedshall, or I want to read The Hate U Give, right, by Angie Thomas. Like, in a funny way, that's the silver lining for some of the books that are high up on the list. They get a lot of attention, like Entangle Makes Three, which like for 10 years was in the top 10 of the books banned. Like that's the silver lining, but it doesn't go down into the mid list really. It really, it boosts the sales of those top 10 when the ALA releases it. I don't know, Peter, maybe you have different data, but it doesn't seem like when they are releasing lists of like 750 books that are questionable, that then suddenly, although everyone's trying to avoid because they don't want to get in trouble, I don't know that, the book 500 on that list is seeing a bump in sales.
The thing is, even the books that are on the top of the list aren't seeing bumps in sales. I was just talking with Taslin about this this morning, and she's in touch with a lot of authors, and some of the ones who are on the tops of those lists, they're not seeing bumps. So that's just one thing that we should understand. Some people say, oh, it's great for the authors. It's really not. The other thing, I wanted to mention back to Desiree's point about, it's not just the classics. It might not be just the classics, but EveryLibrary just commissioned a poll of over 1,100 voters. It's voter perceptions of banned books, really to help us with the messaging. Like, how do we message this? Not just to when we're preaching to the choir. We don't have to figure out the messaging to each other. But if you have a conservative school board, a conservative legislature, and again, I'm in Utah, figuring out how do we appeal to people who might have their hands on the levers of power, and they do respond to talking about the classics. And so that's in terms of political messaging. If we're trying to convince people who are perhaps maybe, they might think, oh, well, maybe some books should be banned. If you bring them back to some of the classics, that'll help them go, oh yeah, no, we shouldn't. That's stupid. We shouldn't be banning those. So just as a political strategy, as a tactic, just know that that's an effective way to message it.
I wonder, Peter, if that's because they've read those books, because they were assigned those books when they went to school.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Right. Yeah.
I also question the word classic, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Also, and just Google voter perceptions on banned books in EveryLibrary if you want to see the report, because we are going to be publishing some more on that. But it's, again, coming at it from the political aspect of how do we fight back. We're going to be developing some messages based on what we've learned from people's opinions on banning books.
Excellent. And that's great work that you do. And thank you. That's kind of where I was, I was kind of begging the question there a little bit, Peter. So thank you for jumping into that, because I've heard that too. The banned books, the I read banned books, that's a great slogan. And yes, it's great for getting people's attention, but it's not necessarily, that old adage, bad PR is still good PR. It's like, no, they're not necessarily benefiting from that. So with that, I would love to, expand on this question more so of what would you say, and we can go around with this question too more specifically, what would you say to somebody who doesn't think that this is serious? Somebody who's like, this isn't affecting me. I don't really get it. And Peter, I know you've already mentioned this, but I'll start with you. What would you specifically say to somebody who says, no, I don't take this serious. I don't think there's anything to worry about?
Well, one thing I'll go back to that poll that we did is most it was over 90% of Americans are already aware of this. 75% opposed book banning. 75% are said that it's something they'll consider when they go into the voting booth. So I guess the good news is that the vast majority of voters in our country do care about this, are aware of it, and also concerned enough about it to let it affect their voting decision. Um, but in any case, like, what do you say to someone who says, I don't care? I think the first thing you do is you listen, and because there's no toolkit for, there's no, here's my response to that, because it's individualized. We have to understand who they are, where they're coming from, what their values are. And if we can talk to them and listen about what their values are, then we can start to message in a way that connects with their values, whether it's liberty or freedom or small government, right? Then we can start to place our concerns about book banning and censorship within the framework of their value system. And that takes some self-awareness to not just use the language that's going to appeal to a progressive, right? Is we need to check our own language, and if the goal is to change minds, we need to speak other people's language and frame it in their value system.
Yeah. Okay, Rich, how about you? Same question. Thoughts? What would you say?
I would say I would try to remind them that books and information are the way that we improve our society. And while I think the parents, it's usually parents, so they think they're doing well, they're well intentioned, they're just ill informed, and they think they're protecting their children from these boogeymen, these evil gay people, or these black people that exist in the world. They think that's a problem, and they think they're protecting their children from it, but really they are doing their children a disservice because they're not preparing them to live in the world as it is. They're creating this false narrative of a world they want. So I'd then maybe try to bring it down to something very simple and say, like, if you say you have a child that you don't want them to swim, but you've got a pool in the backyard, aren't you at least going to buy them floaties? So expose children to these ideas and then let them make their own decisions. It's trust, it's accurate information, and it's a willingness to listen and talk to one another.
I like the pool metaphor. That makes perfect sense. Lee, how about you? What would you say?
So I'm gonna take a moment and just share a quote from No Way They Were Gay, because in doing the research for it about men who love men and women who love women and people who love without regard to gender and people who lived outside gender boundaries, I learned about Bayard Rustin, who became like one of my heroes. He was an openly gay Black man who was actually the guy that organized the famous 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. He's amazing. He was asked later in his life if he had any advice for other Black gay activists. But listen to it, because it sounds like it could have been written yesterday. And this was from 1986. I think the most important thing I have to say is that they should try to build coalitions of people for the elimination of all injustice. Because if we want to do away with the injustice to gays, it will not be done because we get rid of the injustice to gays. It will be done because we are forwarding the effort for the elimination of injustice to all. And we will win the rights for gays or Blacks or Hispanics or women within the context of whether we are fighting for all. And I think that for the person that says, well, it's not a book that affects me, so why should I care? I think that that's it. That's the heart of it, right? Like, if we don't stand up for each other, we're next, right? Like the famous quote by the pastor Martin Niemöller from the Holocaust, who said, like, first they came for the trade unionists and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. And then they came for the communists and I didn't speak up. And they came for this group and I didn't speak up. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak up for me. Like that quote, there's a gazillion different versions of that quote, by the way, but it resonates so because it's really true. And I feel like if we don't fight for the freedom to read, if we don't stand up to book banning, what's going to happen? Because we think, oh, well, it's okay, I don't really like that group so much, maybe we should ban their books. Next, they're going to come for your books. And, and that is not, we need to stand together. And that's how we can affirm that, we live in a pluralistic society where we want there to be, we want to celebrate our diversity.
Angela?
I mean, I don't know if I have anything positive to add to this. You guys really did it. I would say if you, after you've tried Peter and Rich and Lee's suggestions, and we're still met with resistance, my quippy, cheeky remark would be, then don't get in the way. Right? So you don't have to be on our side. You don't have to vote for these things. You don't have to vote against these things. Progress is going to happen regardless of if you want it or not. Just don't get in the way. So if that's a add on top to, I agree with Peter, I agree with Rich, I agree with Lee, but on the back end, this is
if all else fails.
Right. For the last few that trickled through.
Yep.
Angela, you get the first response on the next question, so we'll have to follow. So we'll just go what Angela said.
And I do think one other thing, like it's okay if you're a parent and you think that your child specifically is not ready for a book. That's very different than going to the school and saying that you should remove this book from your library because nobody's child should be exposed to this, or saying that a bookstore shouldn't sell it or a public library shouldn't have it. Those are very different things. And one is absolutely within your rights as a parent, like to a certain extent. We try to guide our children and keep them safe and expose them to things when they're ready for it. But for me to say that somebody else's child, that's not my gig, and it's nobody else's gig either. I mean, that's why we have librarians. That's why we have educators that actually study this stuff, and they're able to vet the books, and they know what age it's appropriate for.
Yeah, and just to underscore, it goes back to, this is why having these books are so important, is because they incite those conversations. I think we've all experienced a book that we were probably assigned, and we read it and we're like, oh, I don't get this book. I hate this book. Why am I reading this book? And all of a sudden the teacher starts explaining it to you in a whole new way. And then you fall in love with that book. I think we've all had that. So not having that context is so important. All right. I'll start with Angela first on this next question, you guys. And sorry, I was just kind of going around in a certain way here. So Angela, the question I'll pose to all of you is, why do you personally value free speech? Why do you, as Angela, believe that we should stand up for censorship?
Well, I think my answer is going to be based in the fact that I've been othered my whole entire life. My existence as a queer writer, my existence as a Black woman. And so it's important because those stories are important. Right? It's important because we don't live in a silo, I think somebody said. So those are the main reasons why I feel like it's, I don't know.
Yeah. All right, Lee, I'll pop over to you. I'm going counterclockwise now.
I don't want anybody to feel as alone as I felt growing up. I mean, I was closeted from age 11 to 25, like actively hiding who I was every single day, every minute of every day, it felt like. And that sucked. And I really want to, I really feel like books are one of the things that help me find the courage to finally be honest with myself. And then many, many years later to come out. And I just feel like, maybe we can't make the entire world safe for every kid to be their authentic self right now, but we can work towards it. And I think books are an incredibly powerful lever towards that. And certainly the books that I write are all about that. It's all about trying to let kids know that they're not alone. And so it's really, really personal for me. And especially when that book was canceled and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So it's kind of my mission, right? Like I want to make it better. I want to pay it forward.
Rich?
I come at it from, I'm a person that's very much in favor of individual liberty and personal choice. And I don't personally like the government making choices about what I can and cannot read. And I believe that the pursuit of knowledge is the pursuit of understanding humanity. So we should, as early as possible, we should expose children, adults, everyone, to ideas that run counter to their own personal beliefs. Because if your personal belief, your personal idea can't stand up to a challenge, then it has very little merit. So it's very important to me to allow people to have the choices to read what they want and to pursue the knowledge that they want to consume.
And Peter.
Yeah, this was a tough one for me because it's so just here. It seems like it's so self-evident. How do you put words to it? But I think it's twofold for me. One is it's just that free speech is so foundational to the functioning of our democracy that, you know, to have a society to function optimally, we have to have a free flow of ideas and information. And the second thing is that, you know, the way censorship functions typically is it's not just random censorship. It's censorship focused on a particular group of people, right? And that means that, or that implies that these groups are less than, right? There's in some ways less than human. My heritage is Jewish, and so I think there's maybe some DNA wiring here for me that, like, as soon as we start to other people and we start to say that this group is less human in some way, it becomes a justification for atrocities. It becomes a justification. If you're a little bit less human for whatever reason, that then becomes the justification for treating you less than human. And I feel like it's not, you know, it's only a couple steps away from, you know, putting people in the camps and the oven. So again, that might just be part of my DNA, but that's why it's deeply important to me.
Yeah, yeah. And I know you're sitting in for Taslin, and I was drawn to her story a little bit too. Just, you know, knowing that she as a mom saw this happening, was advocating for her child. So I'm going to go into that next thing of what can we do? Taslin, for example, she got active and she did stuff. And Peter, I'll start with you and I'll just go back around.
Sure.
What can we do in your opinion?
Yeah, well, you know, I'd be a bad salesperson if I didn't say support every library. And that's both with donations. We're 100% donor supported and all the work we do is free. But also we have petitions, so you can sign book ban petitions and email your legislators. But, you know, the bumper sticker is speak up and show up, right? Go to your board meetings, go to your school board meetings, go to your library board meetings, write letters, email your legislators. If you can actually give testimony, you know, much more opportunity now to do that through Zoom, and find other people in your community who care. A lot of private Facebook groups, etc. You know, find 3 other people and call yourselves the Concerned Parents Alliance of blank. You know, throw up a Wix website, and now all of a sudden you've got some. You know, it's just as important to look big as to be big. A lot of these groups that are out there that are behind the censorship, there's only 2 or 3 people, and they throw up a website and they look big. So get involved, you know, whether it's, you know, an hour a week, whatever you can do. But if we don't show up and speak up, then it's just game over.
Yeah. Rich?
You know, earlier you used the metaphor of the frog turning up the heat in the boiling hot water. You know, I think that's applicable here. Get active, organize, just like Peter said. And when you get active, be willing to converse, be willing to listen, meet people where they are. Don't expect them to come to you. And as you have those conversations, slowly introduce the ideas so that they come to understand them. Because if you throw a huge chunk of knowledge, of information at them, people they're not going to be able to consume and understand that. So they're going to back off and get nervous and defensive because they don't want to seem ignorant. But if you can talk to them, find out what their concerns are, find out why they feel the way they feel, and then slowly challenge those ideas, I think a lot of people, if not most people, will come around, because we are not fundamentally wired to support banning and suppressing knowledge, especially not in the United States. It goes against our fundamental core principles as a nation, and there's a lot of those core principles that, you know, need to be challenged, and we need to reassess these days. But I don't think that's one of them.
Lee?
Yes, and to what both Peter and Rich said, and read. I would really encourage you to read some of the books that are in the midst of the controversy, and then talk about them, and and make your own decision. I feel like that's so much. It's so easy in this culture, especially with the noise, the sort of the business model of the internet is arson. I read recently. I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly who said that, but I thought it was brilliant, and it was so true that it's a place of heat and not light. And do your own due diligence, right? Like, do the work, like Angela suggested. Like, read the book and then decide for yourself, is it too far for you or your family? But I do think that, like, we can really expand. Rudine Sims Bishop had this beautiful quote about how books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, right? They can reflect ourselves, they can give us a window into somebody else's universe, and they can also invite us in via the sliding glass door. They can invite us into somebody else's world. And that's really important to have all of those, right? And so even if it's not a reflection of your experience, read a little outside what you normally would read. And honestly, choosing a book that has been challenged or banned in this way is not a terrible way to put together a reading list that might expand your worldview and give you the opportunity to see it a little differently. Because books really are magical, like what you started out with saying, Desiree. Like the idea that we can walk in someone else's skin and experience another world, that's empathy. And man, wouldn't our world be better if we all had a little bit more of that?
Bingo. Angela.
See, you guys always do this to me. I got nothing to add. I would say, and if you want to take it a step further, I would say also commune with other people. I think that we do sometimes get into our own kind of like way of, this is my community, these are the books, these are the things from year to year, but also expanding that, open up your friend circle, meet different people. I had somebody read one of my Sunday dinner books, and then my book Sunday Dinner is about food from different cultures, and then they took their kid to all these different restaurants from the book, and I was like, that's dope, So do things like that, expand your circle, expand your world, do it for your children. Have those difficult conversations. I'm always in community with teachers and parents, and I always say, don't shy away from the conversations, have the hard conversations. You are there as an adult to create a safe space for kids to navigate this world of craziness and do that and be that for them, but also help them understand themselves outside of their own community and bring in other communities. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're up against the clock, but I want to give you all a chance for closing thoughts. So I'll go back to Angela again, so nobody steals her thunder. Closing thoughts, and you each only got a couple of seconds here.
I don't really have too many closing thoughts. I love speaking at panels like this. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for coming. Most of the time, the people who are going to be in these circles are people who are already interested in this work and learning and things like that. Bring a friend next time. Have them bring a friend. Right. This is how the word is passed, and how we grow in our understanding of the othering that we can sometimes do in literature.
Yeah. The nice thing is we're curating this video content, so it'll be available online, and people can share this talk on their website, far and wide, social media, etc. Lee, closing thoughts.
I think that you have to think about where there's hope, right? Because it can get kind of overwhelming. It's like, oh my gosh, they're banning. There's another ban. I mean, Peter, you were saying it's over 4,000, right, in 1 year. Look for, Mr. Rogers, look for the helpers. Like, where's the hope? So the hope is in the brave publishers, the brave authors, the brave creators, the brave teachers and librarians and booksellers, and ultimately the brave us, right? The brave readers. And I think that there's a lot of courage there, right? Because being brave, being courageous is not the absence of like fear. It's kind of acknowledging that it's scary and you're doing it anyway. So yeah, there are difficult conversations to have, but we can do this. You can handle it.
Yeah. Rich?
Yes. I agree with everything that's been said here. And, I feel like I'm pounding this nail really hard, but the only way I think that we're ever going to address this and other problems that we have is to talk to one another and to listen to one another, have the conversations, just like Angela said, challenge yourself, challenge your own ideas, and stop being afraid to unlearn the mistakes that you learned your whole life.
And Peter.
Yeah, I this is I think going to be a bit of a long game, and to Lee's point about hope. I mean, we need to. There's a lot of bad stuff's going on, but there's all of us, and there's people in our community. We need to find each other, and remember to not just look at the books that are being banned and the attacks, but to get at. And this is, I guess, I'm getting personal here, but when I get out of bed in the morning, like, we only have so much time on the planet, right? And what are we going to do with that? So today, I'm going to use my time in whatever way I can to try to make the world a better place. And today, that's going to maybe take the form of fighting censorship, right? And we're going to do that, and then we're going to go to bed, and we're going to do it again the next day, and really focusing on what can we do. We make choices, we have a certain amount of energy. How are we going to use it? Who are we going to connect with and find community with to work together? And we have to just remember to focus on that as much as we're focusing on the problem. Otherwise, it's just going to be demotivational. We won't have the energy anymore. So take care of ourselves, and let's find each other and work together on these things.
Absolutely. Everybody, Peter, Rich, Lee, Angela, thank you so much for sharing with us, because yes, they are banning books, and hopefully what we've all done here today is helping raise that awareness and helping inspire people to do something about it. More coming up next on the BookFest Adventure Fall 2022.